So we're back. We're hopefully finishing Dominaria today. We're starting with Yavimaya. Covered Shiv and Lanamar last time. Shiv was pretty interesting. It's like a lot of references and stuff that that now have context for me. Lanoir was pretty much exactly more or less what I was expecting. This is another region that I've heard of a lot. But don't know much about, so we'll see how I feel about this. Yavimaya is beautiful but entirely unwelcoming. Its scale is tremendous, with ancient trees towering 3,000 feet tall. The ground is choked with shifting roots, making it impossible to walk on the forest floor. Nothing here is built or constructed. Everything the forest needs grows or evolves, shaped by the forest's will. Yavimaya is a large island, part of the shattered continent of Terracere, that is entirely covered in forest. The forest teems with life, but every individual plant and animal is basically an organ, one part of the whole living organism that is Yavimaya. Any intruders into Yavimaya who threaten to destroy or exploit part of the forest are treated as infection. The fiercest creatures are drawn to isolate, destroy the source of danger, in much the same way that an animal's immune system responds to infection. The dim sentience of the forest remembers the harm it has suffered before the hands of artificers and their weapons of war, and it responds with direct hostility to any renewal of such threats. Yavimaya is a coastal forest bordering on an equatorial sea, worn by ocean currents, watered by abundant rainfall. The forest is wild and riotous, full of tropical color and fantastical twisting trees. It is the greatest wellspring of life on Dominaria. Neither winter nor drought ever lull Yavimaya into a period of dormancy or halt its growth. The ground and roots are covered in a thick layer of loam that supports the myriad plants and animals on the island. Though physically restored by the abundant flow of mana across the plain that followed the mending, Yavimaya faces a unique challenge. The avatar of the force's consciousness, Multani, dispersed itself into a time rift over Yavimaya to seal the rift. Since then, the force has been aware, but not self-aware. Its interactions with other living beings, unguided by Multani's insight. Now that Multani is beginning to reassemble himself, the situation has actually grown worse. Multani's first stirrings of consciousness have roused the forest from confusion to anger, with none of the wisdom of forbearance. Recently, the forest has ejected its human and elf inhabitants and focused its efforts on purging all magical construction within its ever-expanding borders. Life in Yavimaya is an interplay between the ecology of the forest and the psychology of consciousness. The forest's friendship with humanoid life waxed and waned over the centuries. Currently it is hostile, but not more hostile than it has been in various points in the past. As Multani awakened, the forest pushed out human and elves. The expulsion was gentle in a way. The forest simply grew over the settlements, an advancing wall of vegetation that kept growing until the intruders were outside the forest. Individuals can and do venture into the woods, but their actions within are heavily curtailed by two customs. Humans and other species who visit the forest are generally not welcome, but they are ignored unless they break the law of invaders. The law allows people and animals to kill what they need to eat, but nothing more. Cutting a tree to make a tool or a fire rouses the wrath of the forest. Killing an animal to wear its fur is forbidden. Creating artifacts is forbidden in Yavimaya, the Thrawn, the Antiquities War, Phyrexian invasion. These ruinous conflicts were all caused by artificers. Even excavating old artifacts from the soil of the Yavimaya is cause for grave concern. The reactivation of those artifacts is considered an act of war. Not exclusive to Yavimaya, the model fungoids called thalids and their crop beasts as saprolings. Okay, very familiar with saprolings. Thrive in the verdant jungle. Thalids were created by the elves of Havenwood's forest on Sarpadia at the beginning of the Ice Age. The cooling climate caused crops to fail, and the elves began to starve. In desperation, their druids adapted techniques to create a new species of plant hybrid similar to a giant lichen. Havenwood elves were appalled when the thalids began walking around using tools and building shelters. The thalids even began raising crops of their own, the saprolings. One faction of elves even called for the immediate extermination of these abominations, while another held there would be genocide. The argument became most when the thalids themselves took up arms against their creators. In the end, those elves who weren't killed were driven from Sarpadia, forced to flee by sea, where they spread tales of an abandoned continent overrun by thalids and other horrors. The elves could not escape their creations. Ship stores and prevailing winds carried the thalid spores from continent to continent. At the time of the invasion, saprolings were common in Yavimaya, with Multani in Yavimaya and Mulimo in Llanowar willed saprolings into existence in huge numbers to fight the invaders. Many tree folk intentionally cultivated saproling colonies in the roots and branches. As conditions on Dominaria worsened during the Rift era and plants began to die, the thalids continued to diversify and spread, relying less on photosynthesis and more on waste and rot. Scattered communities of elves took to eating saprolings to survive, many of them unaware that the thalids had originally been created for that very purpose. Like all life on Dominaria, thalids have thrived on the influx of mana. They have largely ceded the ecological roles they took over from plants during the Rift era, but the new growth and new rot of the Mending has enriched them. Thalids can now be found in forest swamps and other wet, shaded locations on most continents. They are particularly common in Yavimaya and Urbolg. Elves have tried to limit their numbers in Llanowar with some success. Forest-dwelling thalids derive some of their life force from the race of suns, while swamp dwellers pull nutrients up through their roots during periods of rest, preferring to plant themselves on rotting trees and even dead animals. Thalids are symbiotic composites of plant, fungus, and saproling cells. The saproling elements are the most unique aspect of thalid biology. Saproling spores are emitted from pores in a thalid surface along with their own spores, and seemingly under at least partial conscious control. Saproling spores germinate readily, especially on living plants in ground that the thalids have tilled. Despite their close, even symbiotic relationships, saprolings are not immune to thalids. Saprolings do not grow into thalids, nor do they exhibit any signs of intelligence, whether raised with thalids or apart from them. They are separate species capable of independent reproduction, sometimes found growing in trees and bogs without any thalids in evidence. Thalids live in groups of 10 to 100 individuals, maintaining a small territory and cooperating in the hybrid of farming and herding. That gives rise to their primary food source, the saprolings. When a thalid group becomes too large, a segment of its population sets out for new lands with a starter herd of saprolings. The thalids in a group community prepare a patch of ground and emit their specialized spores. They foster the saproling's growth with fertilizer. usually vegetable matter, but occasionally meat. Among the few thalid bands that are specialized in hunting over weeks up to a few months in the nutrient-poor areas, a crop of mushroom-like saplings grow. When the saplings are large enough to uproot themselves and the thallid's role shifts from farmer to herder, the thallid's herd the saplings from place to place in search of detritus for them to eat. When the saplings are large enough and thallid's have need, the thallid's eat the saplings and similar nutrients grow to making more spores to continue the cycle. Thallid's seem to exhibit proud affection for their little pets right up to the moment they eat them. This practice of sapling farming is almost a parody of human agricultural techniques. Many humans find the thalids funny, particularly since they don't compete for the same plains that humans favor for growing grain and grazing animals. Elves tend to take a dimmer view of thalids, regarding them as grotesque monstrosities, mistakes that should never have seen the light of day. As long as the thalids do not attempt to climb the great trees of life, or rot their roots, the elves usually tolerate them. Thalids are intelligent enough to make tools and crude lean-tos out of fallen branches. They never kill living trees for wood. When a thalid community is threatened, they make spears and axes, and scavenge weapons from fallen enemies. Thalid herders drive swarms of saplings to overwhelm the enemy in a way of vegetable death. Some thalids have specialized adaptations, such as poisonous spores, hard shells, or shooting thorns, that make them more powerful in battle. Thalids have no verbal or written forms of communication. They communicate chemically, releasing different scents that other nearby thalids can smell. As other races lack sensitive enough noses to understand this language, and none are able to reproduce it except through spellcraft, though it's hard to say whether anyone has actually bothered. Thalids, for their part, are entirely incapable of reproducing speech, lacking not only mouths but lungs. Still, thalids have learned to understand a few basic verbal warnings and greetings. Some elves with a vested interest have bottled up a few key scents for diplomatic encounters. The shared vocabulary almost always consists of some variations of danger, go away, or this is ours, an accurate summary of thalid-humanoid relations for the last 4,000 years. Besides the thalids, several of the most important inhabitants of Yavimaya are plants with minds and some degree of mobility. Alongside them, a teeming variety of animals make up the complex web of life that sustains the forest's existence. The tree folk have awakened and become mobile under the influence of Yavimaya's consciousness, are both the oldest race in Yavimaya and the longest lived. They rarely interfere with the doings of shorter-lived races, but they offer their wisdom to those who ask for it. The tree folk have historically had a deeply symbiotic relationship with elves, and the largest tree folk once held entire elven kingdoms in their branches. Though they are wise, their perspective is so long and the rhythms of life so slow that they sometimes have a difficulty understanding the mindsets of the transitory creatures that shelter beneath their branches. The elves with larger lifespans than most humanoids were able to bridge the gap, providing the tree folk with valuable insight into humanoid life. Tree folk can spend entire decades rooted to the ground, stirring only when the time is right. They're slow to rouse in times of war, but when their sap rises, they're worth many human warriors. Driven by Maltani's anger, the tree folk are currently making war upon nearby outposts of artificers, most notably the Golem Khan's excavation site at Koidos. Unlike tree folk, Yavimaya's elementals do not grow naturally, nor are they truly conscious. They are formed out of the forest, vegetation, and earth in times of war or hardship, serving as the embodiments of the forest consciousness. Singular example is Multani, the elemental avatar of the forest. Other elementals are typically subordinate to the forest's wishes, but Multani can command them if he feels necessary. Like the tree folk, many of Yavimaya's elementals are currently making war upon nearby centers of magical artifice. But once where Phyrexian invasions were transmuted into living wood by a deluge of green mana, the main city of the woodfolk is at the heart of Yavimaya, though each Magnanoth on the island has a few woodfolk living on or near it. The woodfolk are simple people, fanatical in their devotion to Gaia. They have no real language, simply repeating the name Gaia. They usually remain in a dormant state unless danger rouses them to action. Mutated reptilians called Kavu, either a new species or a very old one. When Phyrexians invaded, these creatures came pouring out of the ground in Yavimaya to oppose them, perhaps grown from scratch by Gaia, perhaps laying dormant for millennia. Kavu have scaly skin, frilled heads, and either 4 or 6 legs, usually ending in hoofed toes. Virtually all Kavu are adept at climbing. Kavu today may be as small as a horse or large as a Baloth. Yavimaya is also filled with any number of animals. Although Yavimaya has expelled human and elves within its borders, other sapient races remain, particularly those with a proven history of working in harmony with the forest's will. The apes of Yavimaya use simple tools and wear decorative items. They're omnivorous, putting their tremendous strength to good use. They engage in a form of ancestor worship. Their language combines guttural vocal sounds with gestures. Communication with humans takes effort on both sides. They do not have a written language, though they do have representational art. Though sapient, they have not been exiled from the forest, perhaps because they're still wild nature, perhaps because of the zeal and acumen with which their shamans pursue the task of destroying artifacts. Giant spiders possess an alien sort of intelligence. They do not speak any language but their own, and possess a tremendous egotism. Unsurprising, these gigantic, 8-legged, web-spinning, poisonous, armored-killing machines consider themselves self-sufficient. In times of war, they sometimes allow elves to ride upon their backs. A few spiders left the forest along with the elves in solidarity. But most are just happy to be rid of the tiny vibrations that elven footsteps in the treetops send through their webs. Some of the local merfolk tribes have come to accept Gaia as the creator of all things and taken up residence between the roots of the Magnanoth that grow out of the sea. Culturally distinct from their Rodalian cousins, they are in many ways similar to the human villagers, though they are much more warlike. They are frequently called into battle against the Homerids, who would see the Magnanoths torn up by their roots. Like the apes, the merfolk have been allowed to remain in their caves, likely because they are not capable of venturing onto land and destroying the forest itself. The glades, hollows, and streams of Yavimaya are inhabited by a variety of less common creatures, many of them magical in nature. The dryads and naiads living in this huge, beautiful forest are typical of their kind. Dryads tend to keep to themselves and remain near their home all their lives. Naiads gather in groups and play in the waters of their streams. The fairies of Yavimaya are usually called pixies. These tiny humanoids are mischievous and even a bit cruel. Most pixies have wings that are sometimes seen riding the local squirrels and jackalopes as if they were horses. They are immune to most forms of magic. Shadow gnomes are mysterious and not seen often. Evidence of their existence can be seen in the form of the strange barrows they use to inter their dead. They live in dirt-lined tunnels underground among the roots of their trees. They sometimes emerge at night, startling the other dwellers at Yavimaya with their huge luminous eyes. Driven from the forest like an infectious agent by the slowly walking consciousness of Miltani, wind and elves now linger on its borders, clinging to the shores of the island or on nearby islands. As the forest itself expands. These communities are overgrown and their people driven yet further from the heart of Yavimaya. The elves have always been the planners of Yavimaya. Elves devise the nested rings of living defensive siege works that protect the island, and as well as a system of marker and signal insects that alert every Yavimayan to the presence of enemies. Now in their exile, they are held back from the forest's heart by the very defenses they helped create. Yavimayan elves are far less sophisticated than their Llanowar cousins. Where Llanowar boasts delicate kingdoms and courtly graces, Yavimayan elves dwell in rough buildings in the crowns of Magnanoth trees. While claiming closer connection to nature, when they lived in the forest, they rarely descended all the way to the ground. Now, when used to any dealings with outsiders, they are suffering tremendously in exile. The original human inhabitants of Yavimaya were a society of druids, descended from the people of the Thrawn Empire's artifact-centered civilization, and eventually found their way to Yavimaya. Much later during the invasion, refugees fleeing the devastation in New Argive took refuge in the forest. The descendants of these refugees came to make up the majority of Yavimaya's human residents, now outnumbering druids 10 to 1. The druids have traditionally taken on the duty of protecting the forest and the people from one another. The druids hate artificial construction, and they allowed the villagers in their care to only use them as primitive tools and implements. The forest is bountiful, however, and the climate warm, so humans have survived easily with little agriculture and no machines, finding all the bounty they needed on the lush forest floor. An organization called the Juniper Order advocates this, traditionally acted as a sort of liaison to the nations surrounding Yavimaya, particularly New Argive. Most members were born in Yavimaya, but some Argivians have accepted within their ranks. During the exile of humanity from the forest, the efforts of the Juniper Order have been essential in keeping the scattered villagers alive. Knights of the Juniper Order are sometimes mounted on giant tusked foxes. The land that would one day become Yavimaya has played a pivotal role in the history of Terracer and indeed of Dominaria as a whole. Terracer was a focal point of many key historical events. The Thrawn Empire was born here, the land was stripped bare to fuel the machines of the Antiquities War, and both Mishra's Armageddon clock and Urza's Silex water detonated here, devastating the land and plunging much of the world into an ice age. It was during the ice age that the force of Yavimaya began to grow in the void left by the suppression of the human population. Freyalise broke the hold of the ice age, performing a powerful ritual to cast her world spell. As Terracer was flooded, a consciousness grew in Yavimaya, which was later embodied in Multani, Yavimaya's avatar. The goddess Gaia taught her children through Multani, and civilization flourished in Yavimaya. Elves built kingdoms, great apes became wise, gnomes dug their tunnels, and tree folk sank their roots deep into the ground and stretched their branches toward the sun. In the centuries leading up to invasion, Urza came to Yavimaya. Multani trapped him in a tree and forced him to experience the destruction he had wrought upon the land in an endless nightmare. After 5 years, Urza understood the evil he had done and repented. He and Multani formed an unlikely alliance so they could both help the world prepare for the coming of the Phyrexians. Multani gave Urza the Weather Seed, which had formed the hull of the skyship Weatherlight, the key to defeating Yawgmoth and the Phyrexians, and Multani began fortifying Yavimaya against the coming attack, forming a wall of trees and tangled roots all around the coast. When invasion began, Multani's preparations proved insufficient. The interior of the continent was still vulnerable to aerial attack, as battalions of hideously altered killers dropped from troop ships onto the crowns of Magnanoth trees. Gaia produced a Kavu, Multani channeled the energy of every plant and creature of Yavimaya into an enormous blast of green mana, which transformed many of the Phyrexians to creatures that lived in wood. He forsook Yawgmoth and fought on Gaia's behalf and drove the invaders out. The centuries following the invasion, a temporal rift began to grow within Multani. The rift, along with similar rifts across Dominaria, slowly drained the world of mana. Focusing all his energy on trying to contain the rift, Multani fell dormant, and the forest suffered. Gales descended into barbarism. The planeswalker Jessica came and faced the problem head-on. Multani, and using him as a tool to dismantle the rift, dropping the no sorcerer's lifeless form to the ground, moving on to the next problem. The V2 wizard Joya, long used to picking out the pieces after the responsible actions of planeswalkers, buried Multani's body in hope that he would eventually regrow. With the mending, mana flooded back into Dominaria. Yavimaya, already an incredible source of green mana, surged with growth. The forest already covered the entire island, so in the wake of mending, it began to spread out beyond the land's confines. 3,000-foot Magnanos strode into the shallow coastal waters surrounding Yavimaya and rooted themselves. Their gigantic taproots plunged thousands of feet down into the freshwater aquifers beneath the seabed. Merfolk occupy the tangled root system. For years, the forest grew in the seas, reaching toward the nearby lands of New Argive and Almaz. The first Magnanos stepped onto the shores of western New Argive 10 years ago. Soon the plains of Koilos were covered in forest. The Argivian military, largely occupied fighting the dragons and kobolds of Care Ridges, had more to worry about. Phylagi of eastern Almaz offered fiercer resistance. With their backs to the desert, the Phylagi were forced to fight for their farmland. The edges of Yavimaya have reached the caves of Koilos, the site of one of the greatest battles of the invasion. This was a prime site for artificers to study the old machines, the Phyrexian and Metathron armies. The trees remember the invasion, the Antiquities War, and the Thrawn. They discouraged humans and their machines from recovering the ancient weapons of the past. Tony's slow return has stirred the trees to action. He isn't fully awake yet, and the forest is wild and dangerous without his moderating influence. The ancient city of Krug was conquered by Mishra's forces during the Antiquities War. All of the buildings were smashed, and Urza's workshops were plundered. During the Ice Age, Yavimaya forests grew up against the ruins and were buried under centuries of loam. Recently, the ruins were exposed. The city's walls are largely intact on three sides. The wreckage of artifact creatures can be seen sticking out of the ground in odd angles. No being alive today remembers that Krug was built atop the open, older city. The Thrawn city of Neorin contains untold secrets of that ancient civilization. Secrets that, if their existence were known, would inspire artificers from all over the world to brave the forest dangers. The outermost reaches of the Yavimaya forest lie not on the island itself, but upon the nearby islands of Almaz and New Argive. The entire island of Almaz is ostensibly under control of the capital of Samifa, but the reality is there are several tribes, kingdoms, and other states that rule the far eastern and western reaches of the narrow island. For centuries, the plains and desert of Almaz were Phylagi territory, a tiny remnant of the once mighty Phylagi Empire, which was one of the great powers that fought during the Antiquities War. The enormous Magnanoth tree folk have rooted themselves in the plains of eastern Almaz. The forest is hostile to humankind, and the Phylagi are well aware of this, unwilling to relinquish their farmland and retreat to the desert. The Phylagi have elected to do battle with the Thalids and Kavya of Yavimaya. As a result, the forest hasn't expanded very far inland. It only covers a couple hundred square miles. Yavimaya colony on New Archive is considerably larger than that on Alma, stretching from the western coast all the way to the caves of Koilos. The region was formerly known as the Plains of Koilos and was occupied by Argavian farmers and fishers. Now it's forested by the gigantic Magnonoths, who creep season by season closer to Koilos itself. So I'm thinking this is the final section. Jaya Ballard is a native of Dominaria and a prominent part of both its past and present. She's a planeswalker whose influence has spread throughout the multiverse across generations. A pyromancer whose mastery of fire magic inspired the practice amongst mercenaries, and an adventurer who played an instrumental role in bringing about the end of the Ice Age. As a child in Terracer during the magically imposed Ice Age, Jaya survived by stealing until she broke into the chambers of the wrong Archmage. Instead of punishment, he offered her the opportunity to study magic at his school of the unseen. After learning a few spells, Jaya left the school and set out into the world to make a living as a task mage, a sort of magical mercenary offering sparrows for hire. In those turbulent times, Jaya found an abundance of employment and adventure. Caught up in the intrigue and open warfare among several nations of Terracer, she fought alongside Joda to defeat the necromancer Lim Duel and claim one of the necromancer's rings as a trophy. Unfortunately, the ring carried the spirit of an ancient power-hungry wizard, Maricel, who slowly corrupted and took control of Jaya's minds, just as he had taken over Lim Duel. Joda managed to free Jaya, and in the process awakened her spark. With the mending still 1,500 years in the future, Jaya wielded the name's near divine power as other planeswalkers at the time. She used that phenomenal power to undo the evil that Maricel had worked through her. The rumors suggested for a time that her reckless and impetuous nature caused her death. It seems likely that non-planeswalkers interpreted a large absence from Dominaria as evidence of her demise. Indeed, she is known to have been traveled 2 planes across the multiverse, and she remains very much a part of Dominaria's unfolding story. Born in the nation of Zalfir, Teferi was recognized as a magical prodigy at a young age. He studied at the Talarian Academy, where Urza was preparing gifted young mages to fight the horrific machine empire known as Phyrexia. With a talent for temporal magic and a fondness for jokes, Teferi became one of the Academy's most renowned and confounding students. Phyrexian attack at the Academy left Teferi trapped in the bubble's slow-falling time for 2 decades. After he was freed from the bubble, he helped Urza prepare for the threat. Despite his concern that Urza's judgment was clouded by a desire for war, eventually Teferi returned to his homeland and became a royal mage, protecting Zalfir and finding common ground among splintered factions. He established 5 creeds to help his country to prosperity and maintain stability while he continued his research into anomalies on a secluded island. In the course of his research into unstable magic, he accidentally phased the entire island, with all its inhabitants out of the time stream completely. Teferi disappeared with every living being on his island home for over 200 years. When Phyrexia launched another attack, Urza sought Teferi's assistance, but Teferi knew Urza well enough to understand that he would become a mere pawn. Instead of joining, Teferi drew on the lessons he learned from his earlier failure protecting Zalfir and other parts of the plane from the invasion by phasing them out of time for centuries. 3 centuries later, Teferi returned to Dominaria to see if it was safe for Zalfir to return. Although the Phyrexian threat was long gone, he found the plane imperiled by risks in the fabric of time, some of which were caused by his own meddling. Desperate to repair this damage, Teferi sought help from other planeswalkers. To seal the rifts with only partial success, Teferi sacrificed his spark, using its energy to close one of the temporal stone arms. Dominaria survived, but Zalfir was lost outside of time, and Teferi was left as a powerful but merely mortal mage. Spanning the sun-baked equatorial savannas and tropical coastlines of northwestern Chimera, the Kingdom of Zalfir was a millennium-old empire that mastered the use of five-color magic far ahead of other regions of the world. Grand but not grandiose, wealthy but not ostentatious, this proud kingdom stood ready to face the invasion that threatened all of Demeria, but Teferi had witnessed Phyrexian attacks firsthand in the course of his planar travels, and he couldn't bear the thought of his beloved Zalfir subjugated to the same fate. As the people were preparing, Teferi cast a mighty spell that phased all of Zalfir and most of the neighboring Sakata out of time, leaving Femeref behind where once the millennia-old empire flourished. Now there's only a gaping hole in the world. Zalfirians achieved much over the millennia. They mastered magic, erected a prosperous kingdom, and established their own military might. Though threatened many times, their country never fell, their grasp of magic, and their equatorial location preserved them from the Ice Age, which consumed the rest of the world. Their adherence to balance in society acted as a safeguard against crippling internal dispute, and they tempered reaction to hostility, helped them avoid unnecessary war. Nothing else as a nation that grew wise over ages. With a single spell, Teferi removed the entire nation from the stream of time, perhaps forever. Planeswalker Urza created Karn as a temporal probe and weapon of war, but the Silver Golem has served many other purposes. Able to control all five colors of mana, Karn is a time-traveling planeswalker, powerful artifact, world builder, an unstoppable ally. It wasn't only for that leaky oil he spread everywhere. Karn was the first artifact of the Legacy, a collection of objects whose arcane might could be used against the artificial mechanical plane of Phyrexia. Decades later, when Phyrexia invaded Dominaria, Karn fulfilled his destiny, joining with other artifacts of the Legacy to destroy Phyrexia's father of machines. At that moment, Karn became a planeswalker, inheriting the spark from his creator. Karn then created a plane of his own, a metal world called Argentum. While Karn was exploring the universe, the virulent contagion Phyrexian oil took hold, reshaping the plane and corrupting the mind of the warden that Karn had created to watch over it. During Dominaria's temporal crisis, Karn allied with Joyra and Teferi invents her to prevent time itself from collapsing. In the process, he became susceptible to contagion. His mind addled and broken by the corruption, Karn escaped to Argentum, now called Mirrodin, where he was held as the next father of machines by the Phyrexians. Kal sought allies to help save Mirrodin, his native world, recruited Elspeth, as well as Venser. The trio arrived. They found the plane poisoned beyond saving. To help prevent the corruption from spreading to other worlds, Venser sacrificed himself, giving Karn his immunity to the contagion. Grief-stricken by the fate of Argentum and the death of his friend, Karn travels the multiverse, retracing his steps to make sure the contagion has not taken hold elsewhere. As he travels, he is constantly in search of weapons he can deploy against the Phyrexians, which has brought him once again to Dominaria. I don't really want to go over the Gatewatch. Gatewatch are boring and everywhere. They aren't really a Dominarian thing anyways, I don't think, not specifically. The Weatherlight is a legend, a flying ship crafted centuries ago by Urza to be used as a weapon against the Phyrexians. You know, I've noticed this, why can't it just be Urza? I don't know. To be used as a weapon against the Phyrexians, it was Fortune's Shiv from Thrawn steel, fused with living wood that Multani gave to Urza. Empowered by a stone that held mana remained from the collapse of Saros' realm. It is simultaneously a pinnacle of magical artifact, a sacred part of an ever-growing forest, and a holy relic to the Saren Church. It sank in the ocean off the coast of Urbog near the end of the invasion and disappeared from history, but not from legend. Joyra was instrumental in reactivating the Thrawn mana rig that Urza used to create Weatherlight. Found part of the lost vessel and set about rebuilding it. A gleaming relic from an age of legend, the majestic skyship has found new life and once again flies under Joyra's command. Sight of Weatherlight and Omnaria's sky still provokes awe from those who grew up hearing tales of legendary ship. Though she looks like a young woman, Joyra was born among the Gitu over 1,200 years ago, and her wisdom and poise reflect the experience of her long life. In her youth, she drank water that had been affected by the temporal rifts that permeated the plane and slowed her aging to a crawl, making her effectively immortal. She is trained by Urza in the early years of Talarian and helped him craft the Weatherlight, work with Teferi to protect Shiv from invasion by phasing most of the continent outside time. In the Rift era, she again worked with Teferi to close the rifts and began the mending. She facilitated her own sort of mending by uniting races of Shiv and forging the Shiva nation. Joyra was the first captain in the Weatherlight, and now she stands at its helm once more. Though this skyship was originally built as a weapon of war, she intends to use it to help Dominaria rebuild and grow into a new era, following the examples of Shiv's people. Raph is the younger child of Aaron Capinchin, head of the current High House of Benalia. Fully aware of the weight of Gerard's legacy, Raph has chosen to prove himself worthy of Capuchin by mastering the study of magic at Talaria. Though he's still a junior, he is also a skilled navigator and has caught Joyra's attention. He loves flying on the Weatherlight more than devoting time to studies, and secretly dreams of honoring Gerard's legacy by carrying the skyship with as much daring and panache as his ancestor did. During the time that Gerard earned his fame on the Weatherlight, the vessel's captain was Sisay, a Zalfrim whose family had been entrusted with Urza himself. In preparation for invasion, Shanna is descended from the famous captain and wields her renowned ancestor's sword. She is thrilled to be able to serve on Weatherlight under Joyra, but she also thinks Captain Shanna has a nice ring to it. If Joyra should ever decide to retire, Shanna would be happy to take her place. Power Stone that fuels the Weatherlight holds all the white mana from the destroyed Saros realm. Some Sarans view the Weatherlight as sacrilegious, but particularly in modern terms most see the skyship as a sacred relic. For this region, the Church of Sarah appointed an angel, Tiana, to attend the Power Stone, make sure it is treated with proper reverence, and eventually return it to the custody of the church. But Tiana found that she really enjoys the nuts and bolts work of keeping the engine running, now serves as the Weatherlight's chief engineer. She is adept at repairing both machines and magical wards, can fix any malfunction with a touch or whispered word. Arvad is a once proud Benalish knight who is turned into a vampire by Karazov, a vampire of the notorious Sanger line. Despite his undead nature and his overpowering need to feed on blood, Arvad struggles to uphold the ideals of a Benalish knight and fight for good in the world. As chief of security aboard the Weatherlight, he swore himself to Joyra's service for his transformation and has every intention of honoring that oath even as a vampire. His holy magic allows him to tolerate sunlight and suppress his hunger, but he still requires blood on occasion. So far he has managed to feed without violating his ideals. His greatest fear is that his hunger will one day gain control of him. The hull of the Weatherlight was formed from a weather seed that Limo gave to Joyra. Thus it contains part of the solar forest. In Joyra's restoration of the skyship, some spark of life took root in the wood and eventually grew into Slimefoot. This foliage is something like a mascot and a deck swab, tending a horde of saplings that keep the ship clean. Slimefoot is apparently harmless, somewhat adorable, and evidently useful, so Joyra and the rest of the crew tolerate the Thalids present. Again, that doesn't really have much to do with Dominaria. That's more the overarching story at the time. Yeah, not really interested in this bit. That's very, so I guess that is my one great sort of disappointment in the book, since I was really looking forward to sort of learning about, all this early lore that I didn't know much about. And while it's in there some, the focus is just contextualizing it for the, recent set or two that were, you know, in Dominaria. Overall, this has been somewhat of a disappointment for me, though we might take a look at some of the other ones soon. Tomorrow we'll probably be back with Mothership unless I figure out something I want to open.